Welcome to Short and to the Point, a podcast from the Comeback in Awful Announcing. Here's your host, Jessica Kleinschmidt.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Short and to the Point. Jess Kleinschmidt here. Remember, all of our coverage is on Awful Announcing and the Comeback. Appreciate you checking up on all of that. Really excited for today's guest because he's an old friend of mine, and we were literally two ships passing in the night over at NBC Sports Bay Area. He's now with NBC Sports, The Hub, and Peacock as well. We're talking Ahmed Fareed. He will be part of the coverage for 30 plus Big Ten men's basketball games this season, this upcoming season. He'll be part of that studio coverage with a lot of star-studded talent joining him. So make sure you're checking all of that out. I love him. I love his story. I love his authenticity. I think everybody can take a lesson from him in not only what he's done in his career, but what he expects to do in his career, which still has a lot of question marks. I remember when I get asked all the time what my ultimate goal is in sports media, I don't really have an answer, and it's good to hear that he feels the same way, and he talks more about that in our chat. So without further ado, here is my chat with NBC Sports and Peacock's Ahmed Fareed. Well, Ahmed's here, and it's a very exciting guest for me. We've known each other for years, and I'm just excited to be back in your presence. So thanks for stopping by Short.
It's one of those friendships that, it starts on, I know this person, I've seen them on my timeline, and then it's like, all right, now I'm seeing them on my timeline even more because they're getting more popular in baseball and other types of media. And then it's like, oh my gosh, we're working in the same building in San Francisco. So it really was one of those from the online world to real world situations between you and I. But Jess, good to see you again. I'm always tracking your progress wherever you're going. I miss the Bay Area big time, but it's good to talk with you here.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that before I get into the funny story that I just have when I found out you were leaving us in the Bay Area. But you talk about adopting teams, and of course you're more central now. You're with NBC Sports, but you say you're constantly tweeting about the Giants because of all your followers and everything like that. So what's it like, kind of adopting teams as time goes on?
It is the best because I think there's kind of this idea, and I had this idea. I grew up in Michigan covering the Tigers and Lions and rooting for those teams, Michigan Wolverines. I kind of had this idea, and there are a lot of people that work in Michigan that have worked there forever, that it's really hard to be a transplant and truly cover a team and connect with the audience because you just don't know. You don't know all the history, and you didn't live there, and all that is true. But from what I found in the Bay Area and covering these local teams and adopting these teams is you can get caught up pretty quickly. And within a year, if you truly do connect with a fan base and engage with a fan base, either, on social media or in real life. We were at the ballpark at the Giants AT&T Park back then, Oracle Park now, with Say Hey Tuesday, and the crowd was around us every event. It becomes your team. It becomes your team. You feel like it's your team. And I hope for a large segment of the people out in the Bay Area, they felt like I was part of the fabric of the Giants too. So, and once you have that connection, you don't lose it, no matter where you go to next. And yeah, you pick up new teams, especially if you work for another regional sports network, but I will never lose the part of myself that became part of San Francisco Giants Nation for the 6 years that I was out there. It is really cool. And I think it's kind of like a testament to what sports can do, not to get all, wonky and philosophical on it, but it's just like, it brings people together and people from different backgrounds with one common theme and one common team.
Be wonky and be philosophical, though, because one thing I love that you mentioned was you want to connect with the audience. And it's something that you kind of struggled with during your time at MLB Network because you weren't sure who you were connecting with. So you want to have that connection with the fans, with the audience. Why is that so imperative to you?
That's a good point, because for a lot of intents and purposes, when I got to MLB Network, it was the dream job. I was working weekends in Norfolk, Virginia, a job that I loved and a job where I met my wife in the area, but it was working weekends at a local news affiliate in Norfolk, Virginia. It wasn't the MLB Network. So when I got to MLB Network from there, it was like, you have made it and you should do everything you can not to leave. And don't get me wrong, I loved it there. I met a lot of great people who are friends to this day that I met there. But for me, the one thing I missed was like when I went on TV, I was like, all right, Am I talking to a Tigers fan? Am I talking to a Giants fan, an A's fan, a Rockies fan? I guess I'm talking to a little bit of everyone right now. And what I missed was that connection, knowing who I was talking to, knowing what they wanted and what they were cheering for. And so after 2 years at MLB Network, I talked to my agent. I was like, I love it here. I think they want me back, but I am open to kind of seeing what other local and regional opportunities are out there, because at its core, that's what sports is. It's your local team and the fans that root for that team. And for me, at that time in my career, I just wanted to reconnect with that. And I did to the max there in San Francisco. And so I think that's a key part to what we do. Like, if you don't feel a connection to the people who are watching you on the other side of the television, I don't think it can work. It work as well as it should.
And you mentioned before this, you would have been okay for the rest of your career staying locally. And obviously now that you're with a bigger network, you're doing NBC all over. Is that still your same mentality? And I know you're thankful for everything that you're doing, but you would have been okay just with the local sector.
100%. I would have been okay. I would have stayed there, because there's something about being the guy, right? It's like we've all had those people, those men and women who were at the station when we were kids. It's like, wow, they're still there and they are the town. And I worked with a guy in Norfolk, Virginia. His name was Bruce Rader, and he was sports in Norfolk, Virginia. And when I was in Grand Rapids, Michigan, when I grew up, Jack Doles, the local sports anchor at the NBC station, he still is there and he is the guy. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I thought, that's cool. And that's a great career. And so I would have been perfectly okay spending the rest of my career in Norfolk. But it's like, then you start getting conversations, opportunities. I had an agent, got me an interview at MLB Network. I was like, I'd be stupid to say no. So I went and did it, got that job. And then it kind of snowballs from there. And then you're kind of in this realm of regional sports networks and national networks. But it's funny, Jess, because like for me, people say like, what's your dream goal? What's at the end of the line for you? Is like, I have never had that. I never have had this. I will be happy when I get here. For me, and I don't just say this, this is really true. I'm not just saying this because it sounds good, because I don't even know if it sounds good. I don't have goals. I say, I want to do the job that I have right now as well as I can and see where it goes. If I'm doing it next year, and if I do it well enough that they ask me to do it next year, that'd be cool. If I'm doing it well enough and make enough friends in the business that someone asks me to do it somewhere else, that'd be cool too. But would I be happy doing this job in the way that I'm doing it for the rest of my career? And that has to be yes all the time, or else why are you doing what you're doing that present day?
Well, and it's interesting you ask that, because it's a question that gets asked on both sides, whether we're the personalities of the broadcasters or the athletes themselves. What's your ultimate dream goal? And it's okay to not have one, right?
I think so, because in a weird way, I think it almost limits you too, right? If it's like, if I was growing up 10 years ago, what would I have said? I was a huge baseball fan. Let me think. 15 years ago, I would have said, what's your dream job? And it might have been hosting Baseball Tonight on ESPN. And if I set that as my North Star, you're missing all these opportunities where in the last 6 years, I've covered, a couple Olympics and the Kentucky Derby and some World Cup rugby events and done Football Night in America. Those were nowhere near on my radar at any point in my career until they were basically happening. So I do think in a weird way, I think for some people, goals definitely orient you, and you got to have something that you're shooting for at the end of the rainbow. But for me, I'm just like, I don't know, maybe there's something better out there that I'm not even imagining. So let's not get too focused on one thing.
And you're very honest about not knowing everything. And obviously you have a platform where you're covering things like you mentioned, the Derby and the Olympics, rugby, things that perhaps not only do you not know about, but maybe you weren't expecting to cover. You very much admitted, I'm going to bring it to the other analysts, and you get tweets saying, do you even know what you're talking about? And you're very honest. No, I don't. Why is that so important?
Yeah. I don't ever want to try to fool anyone. There are certainly times up there, you don't want to be up there talking about a Rugby World Cup and be like, hey, I just learned about rugby 7 days ago. Right. You don't necessarily want to be that honest. But at the same time, you've got to be able to level with the viewer. I've always felt like I don't want to feel like I'm up on TV pulling wool over anyone's faces, trying to be someone I'm not, trying to pretend like I know more than I do. That's why we have the analysts. That's why when I do the Kentucky Derby, I'm sitting next to Hall of Fame jockey Jerry Bailey and a Hall of Fame analyst who has been covering the sport for 40, 50 years. So I don't need to be that guy. And it's funny, when I first started out, that was what NBC wanted most from me. They go, don't be that guy. Don't try to, dazzle us with how much you learned over the last week reading the research packet. Ask the questions that people at home want to know the answers to. And if you can ask those and get that out of the analyst and relate it to the common fan, because that's who you are, then you're doing your job. And so I go, all right, I can do that. Now, certainly there are times where you're doing Premier League, which I've done in the last 4 years, and where there's a diehard fans watching, and they don't have a whole lot of patience for a mispronunciation, as well they shouldn't, honestly. I mean, it's just like, you should know this stuff. And so it's tough. You feel like you have to definitely be on your game doing some of these sports that aren't maybe the most popular sports out there, but that their fan base loves the sport so much and is a diehard and knows the ins and outs of it. And so that's when you really do have to, again, just lean on your analyst, be brave enough to say, I don't know this. Can you explain this? And then maybe there are some people, even though they are diehards and they won't admit it, they don't understand exactly what the analysts are talking about either.
Have you always been that way, or was it something that you learned over time? Like, it's okay to lean on your analysts a little bit more?
I think I've always been that way. I think, at least for me, you go through this career, which I've been in for 20 years now. It's like a roller coaster, right? There are times where you have to, you look so young and you talk, you don't have a whole lot of gravitas in your voice. And so you bring that, it's like, I got to be an authoritative figure. And then you learn, like, all right, I don't need to do that so much. I've kind of proven myself in this market and the audience knows me. So now I can relax a little bit. So I think there are ebbs and flows with it. But I think for the most part, you got to be honest with yourself and you've got to be honest with your audience. And I think if you can do that, it's funny. It's like, if you can just be honest with, like, hey, I don't know this. I'm not so familiar with what happened 5 years ago at Manchester City. The people at home are like, all right, well, that's fair. At least he admits it, and then they're along for the ride with you. So I haven't always felt that comfortable doing it, no, to answer your question, but I feel like it's something that you constantly have to, you try to learn as much as you can, but at the same time, be honest about what you don't know.
You mentioned having 20 years in the industry, which means you've seen so many different sides of it since your infancy in the career. What are the biggest changes you've noticed since you started?
Oh boy. The one that comes up all the time is I see young journalists starting out at local news or just out of college or in college still. And they go, what should I do to get into the business? And I go, man, oh man, I don't know anymore. Yeah. I really don't know. I can tell you my path. I can tell you what I did. And I was local news for 2 years in Lansing, Michigan, then local news for 5 years, 6 years in Norfolk, Virginia, before I got my big break. So 7 years local news, never knowing if I would ever break into anything national. But there are so many different avenues now, right? It's like you can fire up your phone and a YouTube channel today and be producing at some level. And that really wasn't an option when I was getting into the business. So I think as far as getting into and getting your start, that is completely different right now. And there are so many other ways to do it. And you hear that and you think like, okay, if you're a young person, you're like, okay, I guess that means that it should be easier now. And I think, no, I think it's actually harder, even though you can just fire up a camera and start talking into the camera and make your own podcast. So can everyone else. And so it's even harder than to stand out and to do something that's a little different or that is your niche and your expertise. And so I don't know exactly the path for everyone because it's probably different. So that is different as far as like the business and the day to day. And I am always just shocked at how similar local news, regional news, MLB Network, covering the Olympics really is. When you get down to it, it's like, it's all the same stuff. We're scrambling to get stuff on the air. There's always too few people trying to do too much stuff. It's just the nature of the business that we're in. And so when I was in local news and running around shooting high school football games, trying to edit it and put it on TV, we have someone that is going around gathering information, trying to edit it to get it on TV 2 minutes from now. And you never have as much information in the moment as you want. And so I think that was the big eye opener for me, is that when I got to covering the Olympics, NBC Sports, Football Night in America, that how many things were so similar to when I first started in Norfolk, Virginia and Lansing, Michigan 20 years ago.
And you're listing off all these things that you've covered. How do you find the balance of it all? Because 1 minute you're doing, and we're going to talk about basketball here in a little bit, but 1 minute you're doing football, and then you're doing rugby, then you're doing the Premier League. How are you able to kind of organize yourself and prepare for each one individually, or do you? Is it just a hot mess?
It's been crazy. Like this week specifically, yeah, we just got done with our conference play, kicking off conference play for the Big Ten basketball on Peacock. I went right into Chris Sims' NFL podcast, and tomorrow I've got this ski and snowboarding show that we're doing now. It's a weekly show at NBC. So those are three distinct and different sports and topics in basically a span of 3 days. What I've tried to do, and sometimes you do it more successfully than others, is really kind of hone in on what do I need to know. It's like, okay, I'm covering Big Ten basketball tonight. Do I need to know everything about every Big Ten team? Probably not. Do I need to know a little bit more about Indiana, Michigan, Michigan State, and Wisconsin, the teams we have? Certainly. But do I need to know everything about those teams? Probably not. What are the key players? So I think that's what I've really tried to do. Is like, okay, what is going to come up in conversation? What are the interesting topics? And one of the things, Jess, I've learned too, is that you can listen to a half-hour podcast and learn all you need to know for what is interesting about that team or that sport or that event, because those are people who normally are diehards about the team. And the things that are on their mind and the questions they're asking and the things they're curious about are going to be curious to the audience that you're talking to. So I found that like those are the two ways for me to organize my brain is like, all right, what do I really need to know here? And then listen to a podcast on the way into work. All right, this is kind of the things that they're curious about. They wonder if they can get healthy. If once they do get healthy, are they going to be a good team like they expected? And so then you start to go, okay, I got a good handle on where we're going to go in the show.
I'm right there with you. I love listening to a podcast before because it feels like you're connected with the people who are covering it. Because you probably understand this. Imagine coming from a regional sports network. And I dealt with this with the A's coverage when I was doing NBC Sports Bay Area or California, I should say. And then you look up and then there's A-Rod and Buster Olney from ESPN. You're like, you guys haven't been here all season, but they also understand because they were once beat reporters, obviously not A-Rod, but to see them embracing all of that, they respect what we're doing. And it's just how I feel like we should be respecting the people who are following it all season as well.
It's just a different product, and like I mentioned before, I will always have a love for the regional and the local. And probably as my career goes on, I will get back there because I think that really is the heartbeat of the team. You have the relationships there. You have the relationships. You see them day to day. And sometimes I feel bad because, Ken Rosenthal and John Heyman, those guys are so good at what they do. But as far as breaking news, they have such an advantage because they can break news over here in Baltimore, and that's a story for everyone. And they can break news over there in Toronto, and that's a story for everyone. Where the beat writers who cover the team, it's like if they break a story about what's going on with the Cleveland Guardians, the people they tweet to don't care about that. Yeah. And so it really is. It's just like you have your one close knit team that you might not break the news because that's not what you do. But if you want to read for the whole season long and get an idea of where this team is going and what they're thinking, I mean, there's no one better than the people that are around the team every day and cover the team every day and really do dive into it, which is why when we cover these games in Sunday Night Football, I'm on the email list for our Sunday Night NFL game every week. Every day we get all the clips from the different newspapers and podcasts and outlets out there about every one of these local teams, because we know that they are plugged into what's happening. And if we're not using that information, then we're way behind.
And you have a respect there. You know what they're going through, and that definitely shows through your work. You mentioned kicking off with the Big Ten and men's basketball. Tell me a little bit about these broadcasts and what you're looking forward to with them.
So we've got 50 games. Our PR department's emailed me a whole list of the specifics here, and now I'm butchering it. But we've got a ton of games this year for the first time. They're exclusively all on Peacock. Growing up in Michigan, like I grew up in Big Ten country, I was rooting for Michigan. I had friends that lived right next door to me, lifelong friends that rooted for Michigan State and still do to this day. So when we got the Big Ten and I was able to help cover the football side of things, and now we've got the basketball side, I was so pumped because I just realized the passion of that fan base, and all the fan bases are so huge. And how could they not be? Because there are like 40, 50,000 students at any given year in any one of these Big Ten schools. So we've got our games exclusively on Peacock. A lot of the games will be on Tuesday. It's a Tuesday doubleheader as the season goes on. We just kicked off our conference play last night. Big wins by Wisconsin and Indiana against Michigan State and Michigan. And so we'll ride throughout the whole year. We've got some Big Ten tournament games as well. But for me, Jess, and like the exciting thing for me is that we're building something from scratch. There's nothing to model this against for NBC Sports. This is the first time that we've covered a major conference like this at this scale, double headers every Tuesday. And so we're building a show from scratch. And one of the first things I said to our production department is like, well, let's keep this loose. We want we want to be loose here. It's like, why there's a reason why everyone points to Inside the NBA as the best studio show ever made. And now we're never going to be inside the NBA. I mean, maybe 50 years from now you could get there, but we should at least be going in that direction, right? What makes us unique? What makes us stand out? What can we bring? Let's not take ourselves too seriously, but yet take the sport and the game seriously. And so that's what we're going to try to do. We'll try to have fun, but we have super knowledgeable guys with Jordan Cornette and Josh Pastner and Matt McCall, who are going to be analysts. That kind of gives us the freedom. When you have the smart guys that know the sport, that also does give you the freedom to hang loose a little bit and have some fun, because you're not just idiots up there joking around that have no idea what you're talking about. So that's going to hopefully be the essence of what we do. But we've got some really, really good games, including December 16th, number 1, Arizona versus number 4, currently Purdue.
That's going to be a lot of fun. And tell me a little bit about the balance of that, though, because you want to be informative, but you still want to entertain. I feel like it's a constant battle in today's sports media. How do you find the balance of that, knowing the audience member? You're probably not going to make everybody happy, but you want to teach them, but you want them to have some fun. How do you find that balance?
I mean, comedy is really hard, right? Comedians struggle with that. And so like, we're not comedians. And that's what I think you have to realize right up front. Like, don't try to make jokes. And there was a producer. You remember Tom Brenner, who we used to work with in the Bay Area? I don't know if you were there when he was there. Tom. Yeah. So Tom would always say and he produced a lot of our, highlight shows and some of our Giants pre and post games. He would tell me, don't try to be funny, just have fun. Yeah. And that really is, I think that is at the core of it. It's like, what does Josh Pastner find humorous or funny, or what gets him going? And what does Matt McCall like? And what does he find interesting? And what gets him passionate? And it's just like, is it the pick and roll? Is it zone defense? Is it getting on the floor? It's like all these little things that make each analyst who they are and gets them excited. It's like, that's what you lean into, right? And some of those things are humorous. Right. It's like some guy has this love of coaches who just lose it, and so then that becomes a bit and you kind of lean into that. But I think a lot of this stuff, you can't go out being like, we're going to have a funny show today. It has to be organic. It has to be true to who you are, true to who the analyst is, and true to what's happening that day. If you have a game where not much is happening, it's like you can't force it. Right. And so I think it's hard because it's a special sauce and you can't push it. You can't force it. But at the same time, you've got to go out of your comfort zone sometimes, or else you're not going to do anything that stands out. So I hope we're just true to ourselves. We have fun at our own expense, and we have fun and also provide smart analysis as you're doing it.
The thing that comes to mind for college basketball is the audience, the fan. There's something so unique about them, and especially in this conference. So when you think about your typical Big Ten college basketball fan, how would you describe them?
I would say cold in the dorm, maybe a pizza that was just ordered.
Common if you're lucky. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I just think, you go to a Big Ten school partly because of the environment. Even if you're not a sports fan, you're going to get season tickets to the football games. You're going to probably go to a handful of basketball games, if not all of the home ones. And so I think that's what it is. So it's like you have a wide array of fans of the super, super diehards, and then also the ones that just got into it when they started going to that school. And now when they're home on a Tuesday night, it's just like, oh, wow, nothing's on TV. Let me turn on Indiana or Wisconsin or Purdue or whatever. So that's what I imagine. I just imagine, like I said, growing up in Big Ten country, it was just like what you did. If Michigan was on TV, if Michigan State was on TV, you automatically just turned it on. And even if you weren't glued to the television, you had it on in the background and you were following their season. So I think for me, that's the kind of Big Ten fan I was. And, as much as you root against all the other Big Ten schools, once the tournament hits, once the bowl games hit, you're like, I hope the Big Ten actually does pretty well and we don't embarrass ourselves this year to the SEC, ACC, and Big 12. So that's just that when I picture a Big Ten fan, that's what I picture.
Yeah, I'd say I'd have to agree. Last one before I let you go, you talked about during your time with MLB Network, you I don't use the term imposter syndrome if you don't feel like that's accurate, but
Sure.
you talked a lot about you being in over your head. Why am I here? And that's kind of shocking to me just because, I mean, when I watch you, you just do such beautiful work. So where did that mentality come from? Because it sounded like for those 2 years, it never really went away.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And I think it would be expected early on, right? I came from local news, 7 years in local news, and then here you are, national television, and anyone with a cable subscription can see you across the nation. I had never experienced that before, and that was like, wow. And one of the big wake up calls for me too is that I am now being evaluated on what comes out of my mouth exclusively. When I was in local news, it was like, all right, I'm a videographer, I'm a interviewer, I'm an editor, I'm a producer, and then I put on a TV and go on for 3.5 minutes and talk about sports. And so when I went to MLB Network, it was a wake up call. It's like, wow, I'm like a presenter now. That's basically all I do. So if I go out there and I just totally mess up a show, I'm like, well, that was fun. That was all I did throughout the whole day, and I still messed it up. And so I think that was, tackling that and adjusting to that for the first time was difficult. And I think maybe not that it was too much too soon for me, but it just felt like I'm not feeling that, like I mentioned before, the connection to the audience.
Mm.
And it just took a while. And of course, I was working Quick Pitch, a show that I loved doing, but it was grueling, and it was 1:00 in the morning, and I was getting home and driving an hour back home. And so I wouldn't get home until like 2:30, 3:00 in the morning sometimes. And so I definitely think that had something to do with it too. It's just like, how much longer can I do this for? 1 more year, 2 more years. And then if I don't do Quick Pitch, what's my role then? Do I have a show? Do I have a role? So I think it was just a part of being a big national network and being a small part of it and figuring out, where do I fit in? And after 2 years, it was like, well, maybe I would fit in again back at a regional network. And as much as I loved my time at MLB Network, and I don't think I'd be where I am today without that, for sure. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing without that experience. For me, the enjoyment of going back to regional and then really diving into who I was. Now I'm more comfortable. I have the confidence, even though I wasn't necessarily comfortable for the 2 years, I survived it.
Yeah.
And just like, that's like the one thing I think that I've learned in TV and like life in general. The biggest gift that I've ever given to myself is doing something hard and surviving, not even excelling, like honestly, not even succeeding. If you can just do something hard, which I think MLB Network was for me, 2 years of doing something hard, and I survived. And then when I got to the Bay Area, it was like, okay, I can do this. It's like I survived there, and now this is still a big, big deal. It was still bigger than anything I had done in local news, but I felt this confidence of having conquered that and been able to survive that. And now I can kind of grow into my personality and the person I want to be on TV and let myself shine a little bit more in the Bay Area. And then I felt like I could kind of take the next step.
So does it seem like not being comfortable and surviving that actually helped you? Because if you were constantly, I mean, you said so yourself, you survived. I don't want to say you barely got through it, but then when the next step happened, you were Gucci after that, maybe.
Yeah. No, I think so. I think so too. Because I think a lot of times it looks so easy when you're watching it at home. You turn on the TV, and I've said this, it's like nothing looks easier than TV well done. Right. You're just like, well, yeah, you just go up there and you talk about the game. How hard is that? You just go, and then the video happens, and then, it cuts to this other video, and it's all super simple. Anyone can do that. Yeah. And so when you realize how hard it is and how much you're struggling to keep your head above water to make it look that simple, and then sometimes still not being able to pull it off, I think, you've just got to reconcile to yourself, like, no, this is hard. This is very difficult. And so if you get in those moments later on in your career, whatever it be, doing a live, report and having to remember all these facts and figures without looking down at your notes, or just delivering some very difficult pronunciations during the summer or winter Olympics. It's like you get in those situations, you're like, no, this is hard. And I've experienced that before. And so it's not a failure of mine if this is hard right now. This is just the nature of the business.
I did lie to you. I do have one more question. I did that.
That's okay. You can do 2 more if you want, Jess. Unlimited for you.
Wow. Oh my goodness. You talked about everything that you learned with the regional networks. What are you using now doing all your national coverage that you learned during your time doing regional coverage?
I think I got into a point where I was so calm and comfortable that now I can, when I have a situation where I might be a little more nervous, I'm like, all right, let me just go back to that feeling that I had when I was at the regional, where I was doing a show that I had done 1,000 times and that I had ultimate confidence that I could pull it off. I've been there before. I've had that feeling before on a big stage. Let me go there right now. And so there are times where I'll be getting ready to do Football Night in America. It was 2 years ago. It was 2020. And I got a call from my boss, like the night before, and they go, hey, we've got a positive COVID situation. We need you to come and host the biggest show that we do at NBC Sports. You've never done this before. You're getting 24-hour notice. We need you to come in and do it tomorrow. And so I was like, all right, I guess, sure, I'll do that. So I go in there, and as I'm sitting down in the seat, I still remember this for the first time. I'm looking around, and I'm nervous. My heart's beating, of course. This is going out to whatever it was. The camera crew is sure to tell you, like, hey, 15 million people are going to be watching. It was like, I did not need to hear that. Thank you very much. But I just remember sitting there and being like, this is crazy. Like, I would have thought, starting in Lansing, Michigan, Norfolk, Virginia, that I would ever be sitting in this seat. And if my career ends right now, like if this is it, like I totally screwed the show up and this is it, what a great career, right? Yeah. I got to a point where I got to host this cool show. And so once that went through my mind, I was like, I'm just going to have fun with this. I don't know if I'll ever do this again. So I'm going to enjoy it. And if this is the last thing I ever do in TV, then I made it. I made it, and I made it a lot farther than I ever thought I would. And so it was kind of like, all right, I feel calm again now. I feel like I was when I was doing those Giants pre and post game shows in San Francisco. And then you can do the show and you can let your personality shine, and you're not too freaked out. And so for me, that's a big deal for me, making sure you're mentally in the moment. You're not stressing yourself out and freaking yourself out, and just breathe and relax.
I love that. And I will say one of the reasons I said yes to my NBC Sports Bay Area offer was because I got to work with Ahmed Fareed.
Oh,
and
man.
I remember, and Ray Ratto was really excited to edit his work. And then I remember at our Christmas party, it was my first one. It was at the Gotham Club. It was a big deal. And I look over and everybody's congratulating you and your wife. And I'm like, what's going on? And then we find out you're moving. And I remember looking at you and saying, well, that's rude. Like, you're one of the reasons I said yes.
I know. It's like two ships passing it couldn't handle us both. I think that's what it ended up being. It couldn't handle us both.
Yeah, but I just wanted to say I really admire your work.
Oh, thank you.
I was the least surprised to hear that you were going national. So
I mean, Jessica, you're one of those that has figured it out, and you know it, and you grind through the content machine that we all try to grind through here, right? And it's not easy, and it's like that's the hardest part. My friends, you can't, and I'm sure you're the same way. You cannot complain to your friends, right? They don't want to hear it. You know, they've got jobs that they don't want to go to. It's like they don't want to hear that your sports job is sometimes difficult with long hours and weird hours, and you're writing about things that you don't really want to be writing about. But I give you a lot of credit. I mean, anyone that lasts in this business for as long as you have, and a lot of people around us have, it is a grind, and it taxes you in different ways. And so you've done a great job with it. And so, you know, maybe in another world, another time, our paths will cross for more than just a Christmas party.
Totally.
West Coast.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Ahmed. This is great.
Of course. Anytime, Jessica.
That was NBC Sports and Peacock's own Ahmed Fareed. Told you his story was just super inspiring and relatable, right? I feel like it's super important for us to take notes of the fact that maybe we don't know what we want to do quite yet. And that's all part of the journey, because I get asked that constantly. And I truly don't know. We just had Sean Salisbury on the show, and he asked me that recently. And I was like, IDK, you tell me, my friend, because I'm still trying to figure those things out. Thank you so much for tuning in to Short and to the Point on Awful Announcing and the Comeback. Check out our websites for all of the information and the latest on sports news over there. And follow our YouTube channel, guys. Just search Awful Announcing in the search bar and you'll find it. This show, along with our Awful Announcing podcast. Thanks to Philip for always putting up with my BS. And we will see you next time.
Want even more short and to the point? Follow Jessica at Kleinschmidt JD and head over to thecomeback.com and awfulannouncing.com.